I never imagined that abandoning my family would lead me to this moment, with the past tightening its grip on my perfect life. But what began as an opportunity to free myself now threatens to destroy me completely. And as I sit in my plush office, a simple letter on my desk reminds me of what I always knew but tried to forget: the past never goes away. Martha, with the world at her feet, stared at the letter on her desk. Just 3 words: I know what you did. Her body tensed. For the past 2 years, she had reinvented herself as the CEO of Zentress Technologies, one of the most powerful technology companies in the country. Behind that facade of success and power, however, she hid a crime she had long buried. One that no one was supposed to discover. But there it was, that simple phrase brought her back to a dark night more than 20 years ago, a stain on her past that she had sworn to forget. But Marta knew that oath was broken. The price of her ambition was beginning to reveal itself, and now, her life was at risk of falling apart completely. 2 years earlier, Martha had made the most difficult decision of her life: to leave her family. For years she had been a mother and wife, sacrificing her own dreams to support her husband in his career, raise their children, and live a life that was expected of her. But that role was suffocating her. Marta had bigger ambitions, and when opportunity came in the form of a job offer as CEO at Zentress, she didn't think twice. It pained her to say goodbye to her children, but she convinced herself that she was doing it for a better future, both for them and for herself. Her husband, Carlos, didn't understand her decision. "How can you choose a company over us?" he had asked her the last time they met. But Marta didn't look back. At first, life as CEO was everything she had dreamed of: prestige, money, power. She surrounded herself with influential people, dined with the big players in the business world, and rubbed shoulders with leaders she admired. But loneliness was his constant companion. He had traded the warmth of his home for the cold walls of an office and the relentless targets of a multi-million-dollar company. The higher she rose in the corporate world, the further away she felt from her old life. Had she made the right decision? That thought plagued her in the darkest moments of the night, but she always drowned it in work. Until the first letter arrived. The first letter appeared in his office one morning, anonymously. At first, he thought it was a bad joke. "I know what you did." 3 words that chilled her, but which she quickly dismissed as a misunderstanding. However, she couldn't ignore the uncomfortable feeling that settled in her stomach. She knew exactly what those words referred to. Years ago, during her rebellious youth, Marta had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. An accident, a death, and a pact of silence with a group of friends who had sworn never to speak of what had happened. Marta had kept the secret for more than 2 decades, confident that her life had changed enough to put that dark chapter behind her. However, the ghosts of that night were now coming back to life. Paranoia began to grow inside her. Who knew? How had they discovered her secret? Martha began to look around, wary of everyone. As the tension mounted, Marta's performance at Zentress began to falter. Board members began to notice her erratic behavior and to question her ability to lead. The worst blow came when Javier, the company's CFO, a shrewd man who had always competed with her for control of the company, mentioned during a meeting, "It looks like some rumors from the past might come back to light, doesn't it, Marta?" His gaze was cold, and although he smiled at the room, Marta felt the ice on her skin. Tension was growing at work, but the real danger was hidden outside the company. Marta began to receive more letters, each one more disturbing than the last. The words became more personal. It wasn't an accident, was it? Silence has a price, it's time to pay. Every time she read a letter, her mind went back to that fateful night. It was senior year of college. After a wild party with his closest friends, the car they were in went off the road. Daniel, the driver, did not survive. No one talked about what had really happened that night, even when the police investigated. The official story was that Daniel had lost control of the car. But Marta knew the truth. They had been drinking. It had been everyone's fault. And yet she had chosen silence. Marta thought she had been buried with Daniel that night, but now she was sure someone wanted to make her pay. She tried to contact the former friends with whom she shared the secret, but the calls went unanswered. One night, Marta returned to her luxurious apartment to find the door ajar. With her heart beating frantically, she entered only to discover that someone had been there. On her bed, she found an old photo of the group of friends, including Daniel, smiling in their youth. Under the photo, a message scrawled in red, "I remember you." Desperate, Marta decided to look for Lucia, one of her closest friends from the university group. Lucia had been there the night of the accident, but after everything that had happened, she had disappeared from her life. Marta found her living in a small town far from the capital, leading a quiet life, very different from her own. "I knew you would come sooner or later," Lucia told her as she opened the door. The conversation was tense and full of uncomfortable silences. Marta told her about the letters, about the fear that consumed her. "It wasn't me, Marta. But I always knew that secret wouldn't stay buried forever." Lucia looked at her with a mixture of pity and restrained anger. Marta realized that she had underestimated the scars the accident had left on each of them. Perhaps someone else in the group had decided that it was time for justice. "And what do you plan to do?" Lucia asked. "You can't keep running away from this." Marta knew that. But facing the truth would mean losing everything. Back in the city, tensions at Zentris were running high. Javier, the CFO, kept increasing the pressure on Marta, hinting that her leadership was faltering. Every mistake Marta made, he used as an opportunity to increase his control over the company. Not only was Marta dealing with the ghosts of the past, but her position in the company was in jeopardy. Executives were beginning to doubt her ability to continue at the helm, and the board of directors called an extraordinary meeting to evaluate her future as CEO. But Marta couldn't think about business strategies, not when her past was coming back to destroy her. Constant fear led her to hire a private investigator, but every lead ended in a dead end. No one knew anything, no one had seen anything. Nevertheless, Marta felt the presence of a tangible threat. Finally, one night she received a message she could not ignore. It was not a letter, but a message on her phone: "Go to the park. Midnight. Only then will you be able to stop this." Martha knew it was about Peter, Daniel's brother. She had no choice. If she wanted to save her life and her career, she would have to confront him. The park was empty, shrouded by a light mist hovering over the ground. The cold air cut into her skin as Marta waited. Her breathing was ragged and her heart was pounding. In any other situation, she would have avoided such a gloomy place at midnight, but she knew this was her only option. In the distance, a figure moved through the shadows. It was him. Peter, Daniel's brother, was walking slowly toward her, wrapped in a dark jacket. His eyes, full of contained anger, had not changed since the last time she saw him at her brother's funeral. When he arrived in front of her, the silence between them was deafening. "I knew you would come," said Pedro finally, breaking the silence. "You have no choice, Marta. You can't run away from this anymore." Marta tried to keep her composure, but inside she was collapsing. "Pedro, please, it's been so long," she began, her voice trembling. "It wasn't my fault. It was an accident." Pedro stared at her, his dark eyes reflecting years of accumulated resentment. "An accident," he repeated softly, as if tasting the flavor of those words. "Is that what you've told yourself all these years so you could sleep at night? My brother died that night, and you decided your silence was worth more than the truth. You ran away, Marta. Not just from the accident, but from everything that came after. You never admitted what you did, and in the meantime, you built your perfect life. Your perfect career, your perfect future." Martha felt Peter's words were like stabs. Everything she had tried to bury was coming to the surface again. "I know I was wrong. I know I should have done more," Marta admitted, struggling to control her emotions. "But I can't change what happened." Pedro pulled something out of his pocket. An old cassette recorder, rusty with age. Marta recognized it immediately. There were recordings from that night, and although she never thought anyone would find them, she now realized how wrong she was. "This is the price of your silence," said Pedro as he turned on the tape recorder. The tape began to play, and the sound of blurred voices filled the air. Voices from that night. Screams. The sound of car brakes screeching. And finally, Marta's desperate cry for help before everything went silent. "You have two choices," said Pedro. "Confess publicly what you did, or this recording will reach every media outlet in the country. And believe me, Marta, I won't stop until everything you've built comes crashing down." Marta left the park feeling completely broken. The cold air no longer affected her as panic and despair consumed her. She knew Pedro wasn't kidding. She had seen the anger in his eyes, the need for justice that had kept him alive all these years. She knew that publicly confronting what he had done would mean losing everything: his career, his reputation, and what little was left of his family life. But if he didn't, Peter would keep his promise, and the truth would come out in the worst possible way. That night he couldn't sleep. His head was spinning over and over again, going over the last few years. He wondered how he had gotten here. Everything he had done to become who he was now seemed insignificant in the face of losing everything. She had changed her life, yes, but at what cost? As dawn broke, Martha made a decision. She knew what she had to do. There was only one way to stop this nightmare: confess before Pedro could destroy her. Marta decided to confront the Zentris board of directors. She scheduled an extraordinary meeting and asked them all to be present. She knew this would be the last time she would see herself in front of them as CEO. When she entered the conference room, all eyes were on her. Javier, her biggest rival, had a sly smile on his face, as if he knew what was coming. "Thank you all for coming today," Marta began in the firmest voice she could muster. "I know that in the last few weeks doubts have arisen about my leadership, and today I am here to speak to you with complete honesty." The silence in the room was palpable. Martha took a breath and continued. "There is something in my past that I have hidden for a long time, and although I always believed I could put it behind me, I can no longer run from it. Many years ago, I was part of an accident that resulted in the death of a friend. I didn't do enough to prevent it, and decided to stay silent. That silence has haunted me for years, and now it has come back to destroy what I have built." When I finished, the room was in shock. Some council members exchanged incredulous glances, while others looked at her with pity. Javier was the first to speak. "So, do you expect that after all this, we will still trust your leadership?" he said sarcastically. Marta knew that this was her farewell. "I don't expect that," she said firmly. "I just want to tell the truth. My resignation is effective immediately." The scandal that followed was devastating. Marta's confession became the most talked about story in the media. Headlines like "The CEO Fallen in Disgrace" and "The Deadly Secret of Marta Lopez" filled the front pages of the newspapers. Zentris soon cut all ties with her, and her former alliances in the corporate world crumbled overnight. Her family, whom she had abandoned for her career, reacted differently. Carlos, her ex-husband, remained distant, but her children, though hurt, finally began to understand why she had made the choices she had made. Marta had lost everything she once thought important, but at the same time, she felt freer than she had ever been. She had lived a life for too long, and although the price she paid was high, she knew she had finally done the right thing. Months after the confession, Martha was living in anonymity. She had left her city life behind and moved to a small seaside town, far from the scandals and headlines. It was a simple life, without luxuries, but at least she could sleep peacefully. One day, while walking along the beach, her phone rang. It was a message from Pedro. Marta opened it, trembling slightly, afraid of what it might say. "You did the right thing. Now we can both move on." Marta looked out to sea, feeling a strange peace. The past had haunted her for too long, but now, for the first time in her life, she felt she could start over.